Ibrahim Traoré has just put the biggest middle finger up to the United States publicly. In this video, we're going to break down how he's done this. Given Donald Trump and America's current position in the world, was that the right thing to do? Maybe you're coming into this with a preconceived idea. This video is going to test some of those thoughts. If you like the sound of that, stay tuned. What's going on? My name is TJ and I talk about African geopolitics on this YouTube channel. And something has happened this week that I think sends a massive message to the United States from Ibrahim Traoré. It's only a few months ago that President Trump was put into office in the United States. We started seeing stories like this. Did Burkina Faso military leader Ibrahim Traoré decline White House invitation to Trump's inauguration? Supposedly what happened was that he was invited to the White House. Apparently his response to the invitation was that he's too busy thinking about the concerns of his people to fly all the way over to America and concern himself with the new president of the United States. That in of itself was its own kind of message. What makes this a real middle finger is that just a few months later, Traoré flew to Russia just a few days ago to celebrate Russia's Victory Day in person with Vladimir Putin. So he was too busy to go to America for the president's inauguration, but he has the time and availability to go and visit Russia when they have a celebration. Although this is publicly a celebration, leaders use these moments to sit down and make deals and talk about how they can work with each other and the issues that they face. You have presidents and leaders and elites from all over the world descend on Russia at the same time. Why wouldn't they sit down and talk business? There was a number of other African leaders there, including the Zimbabwe president and the Equatorial Guinea president, which is significant in its own right because he's kind of politically different to Ibrahim Traoré. So let's get into the details of this and see if this is a positive move for Ibrahim Traoré and indeed Africa in general as a continent. So he arrived in Moscow on May the 8th, 2025, aboard a Russian aircraft to participate in Russia's Victory Day celebrations. The visit coincides with the 80th anniversary of the Soviet Union's victory over Nazi Germany in World War II. Traoré's presence in Moscow carries profound symbolic weight in the current geopolitical climate.
Mr. President, friends, we are very glad to see you. And first of all, I would like to thank you once again for making this decision to participate in the commemorative events to honor the 80th anniversary of the victory in the Great Patriotic War. I remember our constructive and useful conversation back in 2023 when you visited our country for the first time to participate in the Russia-Africa Summit in St. Petersburg.
His appearance at Russia's premier military parade represents a clear rejection of Western influence. That is why a lot of Africans like Ibrahim Traoré. They are tired of this Western influence. And it's not that Western influence is all bad, but the truth is that the track record of Western influence leads to resources leaving the countries and very little happening in return. And there are all sorts of additional meddlings, dealings, covert operations that are not for the benefit of the African people.
Thank you very much. Congratulations, Mr. President. I hope I pronounced my felicitation properly. For me, it was an honor to be part of these commemorative events devoted to the great victory anniversary, and I would like to thank you for inviting us. It was a great honor for us.
Russia has been systematically expanding its influence across Africa, particularly in the Sahel region. What has it been doing? Military partnerships. Russia has become the chief arms supplier to Africa, accounting for approximately 40% of Africa's imports of major weapons systems between 2018 and 2022. He is giving weapons, boy. Now, here's something I didn't know. In April 2025, Burkina Faso granted an industrial mining license to Russian miner Nord Gold for a gold project, demonstrating the economic dimension of their relationship. I mean, they're not giving up all those arms for free. However, Russia's economic footprint in Africa remains relatively small compared to China, EU, or the US, with Russia foreign direct investment contributing just 1% of Africa's total. The other way that they help is through diplomatic support. Russia presents itself as an alternative partner for African negotiations, offering support without political conditions typically attached to Western aid. As Burkina Faso's foreign minister stated in November 2023, cooperation with Russia suits the country better than its historical ties with France. Basically, if you can get a better deal with Russia and they don't tell you how to run your country, rather than getting pennies on the dollar for the natural resources that they can offer, instead getting weapons, influence, political power back in return, then why not make that deal? Of course, the West is going to say that this is an evil alliance, right? Because they are enemies of Russia right now. We've got the Russia-Ukraine war still not resolved. And continuously, for the last 3 years of this Russia-Ukraine situation, all I've heard is how this is an unprovoked war from Russia without looking at the broader context of how this situation happened. The NATO expansion, the UK and the US's interference in dealings when Russia and Ukraine were at the table ready to make an agreement, which effectively is what led to the war. But of course, to some people's ears, they reject this type of narrative. They see things in heuristics, simple yes and no, black and white, when a situation like Russia-Ukraine is actually very complex with nuance and history. And it is not just a simple question of Russia bad, Ukraine good. The interesting thing, like I said earlier, is that you have this cluster of superpower leaders all breaking bread together during this celebration. And we actually saw some interesting footage come out of Ibrahim Traoré with President Maduro. What type of additional business ties can happen when people meet like this? Maduro and Venezuela, of course, are very closely tied to the BRICS nations, and we know how Donald Trump and America right now feels about the BRICS nations.
BRICS was put there for a bad purpose, and most of those people they don't even want to talk about it now. They're afraid to talk about it because I told them if they want to play games with the dollar, then they're going to be hit with a 100% tariff the day they mention that they want to do it. And they will come back and say, we beg you not to do this. BRICS is dead since I mentioned that. BRICS died the minute I mentioned that.
The BRICS group represents a significant alternative power center in global affairs. Collectively, BRICS plus countries account for over 40% of the global population and an estimated 37.3% of global GDP. That is not insignificant. This is purchasing power. This bloc is increasingly positioning itself as representing the global majority of non-Western countries. They're dealing with each other outside of the US. These guys are creating their own financial system amongst themselves. They're creating their own trade deals amongst themselves. This is very significant for Ibrahim Traoré and Africa in general. But many people will be saying, well, isn't Russia just another colonial power? Isn't this just a new neo-colonial situation? And maybe it could be. This remains to be seen. But what I will say is that there are some significant differences in the way Russia operates in Africa. Let's take a look at some. Non-interference policy. Russia emphasizes sovereignty and non-intervention of domestic affairs, contrasting with Western powers' frequent political conditionality. Aside from democratization requirements, it's also things like the way they treat African countries around their LGBT policies. You don't see the US sanctioning Saudi Arabia and other Middle Eastern countries for their very harsh laws on this type of situation. But of course, in Africa, they're ready to throw up sanctions and condemn and etc. and so forth. So there's definitely a double standard there. And so it's much nicer when you're dealing with a country that says, handle your affairs the way you want. We are just going to stick to the business deals that we're making. Here are the exchange requirements. This is what we're looking for. And then they enter into negotiations on that front. Of course, you've got security partnerships happening with Russia. Russia offers security cooperation without human rights conditions. And what you're talking about, of course, here is less strings attached. A deal with less strings attached is better than a deal with many strings attached, at least in the eyes of the Africans that are turning to Russia. Then we've got the historical narrative. Russia leverages the Soviet Union's historical support for African independent movements, the anti-colonial struggles portraying itself as an ally against Western neo-colonialism. Russia has an elite-focused relationship. Rather than a broad institutional engagement, Russia focuses on cultivating relationships with key political and military elites. So I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. It's just a different strategy, right? Limited economic investment. unlike China or Western powers, Russia's economic presence in Africa remains relatively modest, focusing on extractive industries, arms sales, nuclear energy, rather than large-scale infrastructure development. So they have a light touch when it comes to infrastructure. I actually would prefer more infrastructure help. Infrastructure is something that Africa needs to improve desperately. And it's not just about the infrastructure alone, it's the way you go about doing it. One of the strategies that the West uses is that they'll give millions of dollars for an infrastructure project, but the string attached will be that it must be executed by that country's own contractors. Essentially, they print the money in their central banks, give some of that money to an African country. So when that country receives that money in order to build the infrastructure, the finances go right back to the economies that gave them the money in the first place. It boosts their economy. And Africa is left, yes, maybe with infrastructure, but that money didn't flow into the economy and jobs of the locals. And that is now seen as quite predatory. Russia doesn't do that. So what are the implications for global geopolitics? Multipolar world. The strengthening of the alternative powers centers like BRICS challenges the US-led Western liberal order and accelerates the transition towards a multipolar world. It's not just everyone is focused on America. The decline of Western influence, France's forced withdrawal from the former colonies, and the pivot of the Sahel countries towards Russia demonstrates the waning influence of traditional Western powers in Africa. Global military alignment, the coordination between non-Western powers through mechanisms like BRICS, represents an emerging alliance of countries seeking to gather independence from Western dominance. I also think this is an interesting point down here. Stronger ties between Russia and countries like Burkina Faso and Venezuela help Moscow circumvent Western sanctions and maintain global influence, despite its isolation from Western markets. You know, whatever's happening with tariffs in America matters less when you can sell into the Russian market, or the Russian market can deal with you. So what do you think about all of this? In previous videos, I've seen a lot of support for Ibrahim Traoré's connection with Russia. Do you feel the same way? Let me know in the comments. But if you have nothing to say, would it be too much for me to ask you to write the words African connections in the comment section? It lets me know that you watched the video to the end, you support the channel, you like what I'm doing, and you want me to keep going. Thank you so much for watching the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.